Montana Territory, August 1879. The sky cracked open with thunder when Delaney Kirkland was dragged from a wagon and thrown into the dirt by a bandit with blood on his boots. Rain had not fallen in weeks, and the dust clung to her wedding dress like shame. The lace sleeves were torn at the shoulder, and the pearl buttons down the back had been ripped off in her struggle. Somewhere behind her, the preacher still lay slumped over the altar plank, his Bible soaked in his own blood. Her groom? Gone. He had not even fought for her. "You can cry if you want," the bandit leader said, crouching in front of her with the stink of whiskey on his breath. "No one's coming to save you." Delaney didn't cry. Not then. She just stared at him with wide, gray eyes and clenched her jaw until her teeth ached. She would not give him the satisfaction. Not him, not the others, not the one who had dragged her from her home and declared her marriage invalid because her father had debts he could not pay. She had been banished from the town of Red Rock Ridge not by law, but by gossip, threats, and a coward of a fiancé who handed her over to settle a score. The bandits had taken her into the mountains, into some godforsaken canyon full of pine and shadows, where they tied her to a post and left her with stale bread and cold coffee. She was 3 days into captivity when he came. His name was Quillan Ward. He rode alone, silent and tall in the saddle, with a rifle slung across his back and a hat pulled low. The sun was just starting to dip when he crested the ridge above the camp and spotted the fire. He watched from behind a stand of scrub pine, waiting, studying. He counted 4 men, 1 sleeping, 2 drinking, 1 pacing near Delaney like a wolf too long in a cage. Quillan had not planned on rescuing anyone. He had been on his way to deliver supplies to a mining camp 2 counties over. But the sight of her dirt-streaked face, ripped wedding dress, hands tied in front of her hit something inside his chest that had not stirred in years. He moved fast when the time came. 2 shots, clean and sharp, took out the guards. The others scattered like roaches, but Quillan was faster. He had a knife at the last man's throat in seconds. "Where's the key?" he growled. The man whimpered and pointed to a saddlebag. Quillan kicked him away and opened the bag. He pulled the key free, crossed the clearing, and dropped to 1 knee in front of Delaney. She stared at him, too stunned to speak. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low, steady. She shook her head. He unlocked the cuffs and gently took her wrists. "Can you walk?" "I think so." He helped her stand. She wobbled and he caught her. She was light in his arms, all bones and willpower. He walked her to his horse, a dark bay with a white blaze, and lifted her up behind the saddle. "Hold on," he said. She wrapped her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. They rode for 2 hours until the stars came out. He took her to a small hunting cabin tucked into the treeline, where he kept dry goods, blankets, and a cot. He let her wash up with a basin of water. She didn't ask for privacy, and he didn't offer, not because he meant any harm, but because she looked too tired to care. When she came out, her hair was damp and combed back, her face clean. He handed her a tin plate of beans and cornbread. She ate in silence. When she finished, she looked up at him. "Why did you help me?" He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Saw you tied up. That was enough. You could have ridden on." "Could have," he said. "But I didn't." She studied him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Quillan Ward." "I'm Delaney." He nodded. "Figured you were a bride." She looked down at the ruined dress. "Not anymore." He didn't speak for a while. Then, "That man you were marrying, he let them take you." She nodded, slow and heavy. "He said it was the only way to save his store. My father owed money. They came to collect. Eli, that was his name, said it was either the store or me." "Did you love him?" "No," she whispered. "But I thought maybe he'd try." Quillan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "No one's going to take you again. Not while I'm around." Delaney's hands trembled in her lap. "Why do you care?" Quillan stepped forward, crouched beside her. "Because I know what it is to be left behind. And because the second I saw you, I knew. Knew what? He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. That you were mine. Delaney blinked, and a tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. I do not want to be anyone's property, she said. You are not, he said softly. But you are someone worth protecting. And I do not walk away from that. That night, she slept on the cot. He slept in a chair by the door. Neither of them said much more, but something passed between them, a quiet understanding. A flicker of something that burned low but steady. By morning, she was still there. And so was he. They rode together toward a new town. He said he knew a place where her name didn't matter, where she could start over. She wore one of his shirts, belted at the waist, and a pair of old canvas pants he had in the cabin. Her dress they left behind, buried in a shallow grave beneath a pine tree. Along the trail, she asked him, "Did you mean it? What you said? That I was yours?" He looked over at her. "I have not said that to anyone in my whole life." "Why me?" He smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Because you looked at me like I was not just a man with a gun. You looked at me like you saw something worth trusting." "I did." He reached over and took her hand. "Then I will spend every day proving you were right." Delaney looked down at their joined hands. Her heart ached, not from pain, but from the sudden bloom of something she had thought lost forever. Hope, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of love. The land opened wide around them by the third day's ride. With each mile, the trees thinned and the mountains fell behind, giving way to golden grasslands that rolled out under a low blue sky. Somewhere in the distance, the Yellowstone River moved slow and brown through the valley, its banks lined with cottonwood and ash, their leaves just beginning to yellow. Quillan led them westward, steady and wordless most of the time. The horse knew its pace, and Delaney had stopped gripping his waist by the second day. Though she still rode behind him on the saddle, her legs gone stiff from hours in the stirrups. She didn't complain. She watched the land instead, eyes alert and quiet. They stopped near midday beneath a bluff where the rock broke high and red above a creek that ran cold and narrow. Quillan dismounted and helped her down with one hand at her elbow. She didn't need the help, but he offered it anyway. He handed her a tin cup filled from the creek, then crouched to check the horse's hooves. Delaney sipped slowly, watching him. "You always travel alone?" she asked. He didn't glance up. "Most times." She let the silence stretch, then said, "You live out here, or just pass through?" "I've got a claim north of here. Small land. Not much to look at." "What's on it?" "A house. Barn. 1 cow, 2 chickens. Mule that don't pull nothing unless you yell at him." She set the cup down on a rock. "Sounds better than what I left." He finally looked at her. "You want to come with me?" "I don't know what I want yet." He nodded once. "Fair answer." They stayed there through the heat. She took off her boots and dangled her feet into the water. He busied himself with patching a tear in his saddlebag. Neither of them forced talk. When the sun dipped low again and the air cooled, they rode on. That evening, they reached a cabin nestled beside a split rail fence. The roof sagged at one corner, but smoke still curled from the chimney. An older woman stepped out onto the porch as they approached. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows and flour dusted the front of her skirt. "Quillan Ward," she said, folding her arms. "I thought you were bringing fence wire, not strays." "She's not a stray, Esther," he said. Delaney dismounted without help this time. "I can speak for myself." Esther raised an eyebrow, then gave a short nod. "Good. Come inside. There's stew and bread if you're not too proud to eat what's left." They sat at a small pine table, the wood worn smooth by years of elbows and supper bowls. Delaney ate slow, careful with each bite. Esther watched her, sharp-eyed and quiet. "You got family?" she asked. Delaney shook her head. "None that would take me in." "Well," Esther said, "you'll need work if you plan to stay. I don't feed mouths that don't pull their weight. I can sew. And I know how to mend harness. You ever milk a cow?" "Yes." Esther leaned back. "Then we'll get along." After the meal, they stepped outside again. The night had come soft and deep, the stars thick above the prairie, and the air carried the scent of cut hay and wood smoke. Quillan stood beside the fence post, rolling a match between his fingers but not striking it. Delaney joined him, arms folded tight against the chill. "She's a friend of yours?" she asked. "She took me in when I had nothing. Wasn't always a cowboy. What were you before?" He looked over at her, eyes unreadable. "A runaway. From a war I didn't start and a home that didn't want me back." She didn't press for more. Instead, she said, "You ever think about going east again?" "No, why not?" "Nothing there for me," he said. "Out here I know what things cost. I know what's mine." She stood quiet a moment, then said, "Would I count if I stayed?" He didn't speak right away. Then, low and certain, "Yes." She swallowed hard. "I don't know how to be someone new, Quillan. I don't even know who I was before." "You don't have to be new," he said. "You just have to be real." She looked down at her hands. "I was going to marry a man because it was expected. I thought that would make me safe. It didn't." "No," she said. "But you did." He reached out, slow and sure, and took her hand. "I don't make promises fast, Delaney. I've seen what breaking them does." "I don't want fast," she said. "I want true." His fingers tightened around hers. "Then stay." She looked up at him. "I wasn't planning to. But I want to." He nodded once, solemn. "Then you've got a place. Not just for tonight. For as long as you want it." Delaney didn't answer with words. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder as the wind stirred the grass around them, and the stars kept watch overhead. The wind shifted by morning, carrying the scent of rain that had not yet come. Delaney stepped barefoot into the yard, the hem of her borrowed skirt brushing her ankles. She carried a pail and moved toward the lean to where the cow stood, lowing softly in the dawn light. Her hair was tied back with a strip of linen, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. She'd never lived like this before, rising before the sun, hands raw from work, dirt beneath her nails by breakfast, but it settled into her like something she'd been waiting for without knowing. The rhythm of it, the clarity. Inside the barn, Quillan was mending a gate hinge, his shirt damp at the back from sweat already. He glanced up as she passed the doorway. "You planning to plant anything?" She set the pail down and nodded. "Esther said there's seed potatoes in the shed. Might be late in the season, but if the frost holds off." He rested the hammer against the beam. "There's a patch south of the house that holds moisture better. I'll help you turn it. I can manage the digging." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I'll still help." She knelt beside the cow, steadying the bucket with her knees. The milk came slow at first, and she focused on the rhythm, the sound of it, the warmth against her fingers. Quillan leaned in the doorway, his hat in his hands now. "You ever think about learning something new?" "Every day," she said without looking up. "Every single one." He stepped into the barn, crossing the packed dirt floor. "Esther's brother runs a dry goods up in Livingston. He's looking for someone who can keep books and handle the winter orders. Said he'd take someone steady, doesn't care about a name." Delaney met his eyes. "You think I'm steady?" "I think you've held yourself together without once falling apart. That counts." She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't expect you to be the kind of man who plans ahead. I didn't used to be. What changed?" He reached out, brushed a spot of hay from her shoulder. "You." Later, they walked to the riverbank where the water ran wider and slower. She carried a basket with wash to be rinsed and pinned, and he brought a small knife to carve a new handle for the kettle lid Esther had cracked last week. They didn't speak for a while, the quiet between them full but not heavy. Geese flew overhead, their calls echoing down the bend. Delaney wrung out a petticoat and draped it over the line strung between two willows. "My mother taught me to sew by candlelight. Said a woman ought to know how to mend more than just fabric." Quillan looked over from the rock where he sat whittling. "Did she?" "She tried." Delaney sat beside him, her skirt spread in the grass. "But she also told me to marry early and stay quiet. That didn't work out so well. He turned the blade in his hand. You regret it? Not anymore. She glanced sideways. You ever come close? To marriage? She nodded. One time, he said, before I left Kentucky. Her name was Clara. She had a brother who didn't think much of me. I was 19, working meat hooks at the stockyard. Didn't have land, no prospects. He told her I'd drag her under. And did you? No. I left before I had the chance. Delaney watched his hands move with the blade. Do you think you would have made her happy? He didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to be enough for anyone back then. And now, he set the carved handle down, looked at her fully. Now I'd rather try and fail than walk away again. She reached for his hand, dirt and all, and fit her fingers between his. You haven't failed. That night, Esther handed Delaney a folded bundle wrapped in muslin. I let out the seams, she said. Should fit you better now? Delaney opened it to find a dress simple calico with a high collar and a row of small wooden buttons. She ran her hand over the cloth, throat tight. I didn't ask for, I know, Esther said. But you're not going to walk around in a man's shirt the rest of your life. Not if you're staying. Delaney met her gaze. I am. Esther gave a small nod. Then you'll wear that tomorrow. And you'll come with me to the Granger's place. They're short on help for the harvest. It's honest work and it pays decent. Delaney folded the dress back into its wrap. Thank you. Before bed, she stepped out into the yard, the moon casting shadows across the fence line. Quillan stood there, arms crossed, watching the sky. You believe in second chances? She asked. He didn't turn. I believe in people getting to write their own ending. She moved beside him. And ours? He looked down at her, eyes soft in the dark. Ours isn't finished yet. But it's already better than I ever thought I deserve. Delaney reached up, brushing her fingers along his jaw. Then let's keep writing it. He leaned down, and when their lips met, the kiss was quiet and sure, like the first stone placed in a foundation. And neither of them looked back. By the second week, the soil under Delaney's nails no longer felt foreign. The small south plot had taken to the potatoes. Quillan had turned the rows with a spade while she pressed seed eyes into the damp earth, her palms scratched raw but steady. When the sun fell, they rinsed their hands in the rain barrel and sat on the porch without needing to say much. He would whittle or sharpen tools. She would patch worn seams or let her hands rest in her lap. Still. One afternoon, Esther returned from the Grangers with news folded beneath her arm like laundry. Schoolhouse has been closed since last spring, she said, setting a tin of lard on the kitchen shelf. Teacher married off and moved to Bozeman. Town council's looking for someone who can read, write, and keep the children from burning the walls down. Delaney paused at the basin, a rag in hand. Do they want someone local? They want someone who can last through winter. Later, Delaney brought it up while she and Quillan hauled wood to the shed. I could do it, she said, lifting a split log from the pile. I was taught with McGuffey's readers. My penmanship's sound. Quillan handed her another log. You'd be good for them. I'm not trained. You've got more sense than most women I've known. That's enough. She looked down at the splinters in her palm. Wouldn't be much pay. Would be yours, he said. That night, she sat on the porch steps, legs tucked beneath her, while he laid out iron nails for a new gate latch. The moon hung thin above the barn. She watched him for a while before speaking. When I was young, I wanted to be a writer. I'd steal scraps of paper and copy down stories from the old almanacs. My mother burned half of them, said dreaming wasn't useful. Quillan didn't look up from the nails. You still want that? I don't know. Maybe I just wanted someone to hear me. I'm listening. She smiled, small and tired. You always are. He set the hammer aside and stood, brushing dust from his trousers. Come with me. They walked past the barn through the thinning grass to where the land sloped toward the creek. He stopped at a stand of young cottonwoods, their leaves rustling like a hush. I was thinking of building here, he said. 2 rooms. A loft. Porch facing east. Delaney turned slowly, taking it in. This for you. For us, he said. If you want it. She stepped closer, her voice barely over the wind. You want to build a home with me? I want to build a life with you. The home's just part of it. She reached for his hand, their fingers linking without hesitation. Then let's start. He kissed her there, beneath the cottonwoods, with the breeze threading through the branches and the stars holding still above them. In the weeks that followed, lumber came by wagon and was stacked beside the clearing. Quillan measured each beam by hand. Delaney kept a ledger of supplies, bartered extra eggs for nails, and stitched curtains from old feed sacks. They worked beside one another as though they'd always done so. She learned to hold a board steady while he sawed. He learned to appreciate the exactness of her notes, the quiet pride she took in small order. One evening, as they sat by the hearth of Esther's cabin, he looked at her over the rim of his cup. You're not the same woman I found tied up in that canyon. Delaney's gaze held his, steady and warm. And you're not the man who rode off alone. They didn't need to say more. The next morning, she rode into town with Esther, a letter folded in her pocket. It was addressed to the township board, offering her name for the school position. She'd signed it clearly, Delaney Kirkland. No longer hiding. No longer waiting for someone else to say she belonged. When she returned, Quillan was setting the floor joists. She dismounted and walked to the edge of the frame, watching the bones of their house rise from the earth. He looked up, sweat on his brow, shirt sleeves rolled. They take your offer? They said they'll consider it at next meeting. They'd be fools not to. She stepped onto the planks and knelt beside him. When this is done, will you help me set up a little shelf for books? I want the children to see them as something more than chores. He touched the back of her hand. We'll build you a whole wall of shelves. Delaney leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since her world had broken open, she breathed without weight behind it. From ruin, they were building something solid. Not just a home. A future. By October, the first frost silvered the fields. The mornings came sharp with cold, and the house stood half-raised in the clearing, its frame strong and square against the pale sky. Quillan had hung the rafters by hand, and Delaney had laid each shingle for the roof with deliberate care, her knuckles red and rough from the chill. The ground had hardened underfoot, but the potato patch held. She pulled the last of the crop with Esther, their breath visible in the air. The soil turned up dark and heavy around the roots, and they packed the yield into burlap sacks for winter storage. Delaney didn't speak much that day, too focused on the feel of the earth and the rhythm of the work. She'd never had a harvest before. It settled something quiet inside her. That evening, Quillan brought in a sack of nails from the barn and set them by the door. He stood a moment watching the fire catch in the stove. You ever think about what comes next? He asked. Delaney looked up from the table where she was sewing a hem. Beyond the house? He nodded. I think about a room with a window that faces east, she said, and a tin kettle that never leaks. I think about waking up and knowing there's no one waiting to take anything from me. He stepped closer. And me, she set the needle down. I think about you most of all. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small velvet pouch. I've had this for a while. Was going to wait until the roof was on. But, she stood slowly. He opened the pouch and held out a ring. It wasn't new. The band was worn smooth, the stone small but clear. My mother's. She gave it to me before I left Kentucky. Said to use it when I found someone who made me stop running. Delaney's breath caught. I didn't think I'd ever wear one again. This one's not a bargain, he said. It's a promise. She took it from his hand and slid it on. It fit without forcing. I want to marry you, Quillan, she said. Not because I need to. Because I want to. He cupped her face, his hands rough and warm. Then we will. They married 2 Sundays later in a clearing behind Esther's cabin, with leaves falling soft around them like blessings. The preacher came from Livingston, a thin man with a slow voice, and the ceremony was short. Esther baked sweetbread and the Grangers brought cider. The children ran wild between the trees, and someone strung up a fiddle tune that carried across the hills. Delaney wore a dress she'd sewn from calico left over in the storehouse. Her hair was braided back, and she kept her boots on. Quillan stood beside her in his cleanest shirt, his shoulders squared and his hair combed back neat. When the preacher asked if she would take him, her voice didn't waver. Afterward, they walked back to the house, still unfinished, but theirs. She stepped inside with him, her hand in his, and looked over the bare floorboards and the hearth waiting for its first fire. The walls were still unpainted, the shelves empty. But it already felt like a home. That night, they lay beneath a patch quilt on a mattress stuffed with straw and wool. The wind whistled through the gaps in the window, and he pulled her close against him. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she whispered. "You don't have to," he murmured. "We've got enough right here." Her hand rested over his chest. "You think it's possible to forget how it felt before?" He kissed her temple. "Maybe not forget, but we can live in a way that makes it matter less." She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of him, the safety. Their days unfolded with the rhythm of approaching winter. Delaney began teaching 3 days a week in the schoolhouse, walking in with her satchel and a tin lunch Quillan packed for her each morning. The students were a mix of ranch hands' children and homesteaders' sons and daughters, restless, curious, loud. She taught them to read by candlelight when the days shortened, and some nights she'd bring stories home to Quillan and read them aloud by the stove. He worked the land, mended fence, laid in stores. He built her a bookshelf just before the first snow, rough pine sanded smooth. She filled it slowly, 1 volume at a time. By December, the roof no longer leaked and the walls held firm against the wind. They strung dried apples and hung juniper above the door. The mornings were quiet and the evenings belonged to them alone. One night, she found him sitting at the table, a letter half-written in front of him. "Who's it to?" she asked. "My brother," he said. "Haven't written him in years." She stepped behind him, arms around his shoulders. "Tell him you're well. Tell him you've built something worth staying for." He reached up and touched her wrist. "I will." In the spring, she planted a small bed of wildflowers behind the house. He added a bench beside it where she liked to sit and read while the sun warmed her feet. The land stayed poor, but they made it enough. 1 calf was born in April. The chickens laid well. Their life was not grand, but it was honest. They laughed more as the months passed. Sometimes she would catch him humming while he chopped kindling. Sometimes he'd find her staring out the window, smiling for no reason. And when he kissed her, it was always the same, slow, certain, anchored in the kind of love that didn't ask for anything more than truth. Years went on. The schoolhouse got a new roof. The shelves filled. The house held up through storm and frost and summer heat. Quillan never left again. Delaney never needed to. They grew old on that land. They were known not for what they had escaped, but for what they had built. And every morning she woke beside him, her hand still in his.